Let's get to some tech news this morning. Joining us, as we said, angel investor Jason Calacanis and Apple's former chief evangelist now at Canva, Guy Kawasaki. Guys, good to see both of you. Jason, I'm looking at TweetDeck. I see your tweet. I'm positive on Apple, and I have an idea or two. What do you mean?
Well, I think, obviously Apple is extracting every ounce of value from the iPhone. When you see them launch something like the iPhone 5 again, and you see Tim Cook talking about India and China, and then finally talking about the services business and how that could actually be meaningful, it means they're really extracting every ounce of earnings and profit out of that device. The big issue, I think, is the M&A crisis over at Apple, which is they really are a victim of how brilliant they are. They think that they're better at building things than everybody else, which is true, but you can only build so many things in the world. And Apple is up against Google, Facebook, and a lot of other companies, including Microsoft, which have become fearless on the M&A front. And Apple, the most creative thing they've bought and the most, aggressive thing they've done is buy a headphones company. In other words, they got to get their act together on an M&A front, and that could be transformative for the company.
Guy, I'm wondering where you fall when it comes to Apple right now. Tim Cook's argument is that we're in a normal smartphone cycle. We just have bad comps year over year. This is going to recover possibly in pretty short term. Apple's competitors are arguing, no, the smartphone is in secular decline. Maybe devices won't matter again for a long time. It's all about the cloud and intelligent bots. Do you think hardware is going to matter less in the medium and maybe even long term than it has in the past, or is this just a short-term cycle Apple's going through?
I think there's been an overreaction to Apple's perceived lack of meeting expectations. At some level, it still made $10 billion, right? And it was the most profitable company, I think, in the world. So yes, there's been an overreaction. However, that said, unlike Jason, I don't think there's an M&A crisis. That's the first time I've ever heard that complex term. I think there's a crisis of the fact that Apple is not perceived as leading in innovation. And there are things like, good news, bad news. So they introduce an SE model iPhone. But, who among us said, wow, let's like drop our iPhone 6s and go buy that phone. And that's the expectation for Apple. For better or for worse, whenever Apple has a press conference, we expect to want to go and stand in line at the Apple Store. And that hasn't happened for a while. And I think that's the fundamental problem. So when Apple makes great hardware, it does well.
Yeah. But here's the thing. If you look at the other companies they're up against, Google bought Android, they bought YouTube, and then you look at something like Facebook, they bought Instagram, they bought Oculus, which is a big wow, sort of moment, WhatsApp, Microsoft buying Wunderlist, Sunrise, a bunch of different things. There's two ways to innovate. You could buy something that's incredibly innovative in the world like Oculus, or you can build it yourself. And I'm with Guy. You go into the Apple Store now, the last 2 or 3 times I broke my iPhone screen, I went into the store, I tried to give them money. There was nothing there that I wanted to buy. There was nothing new and exciting. But I do think it's overblown. The stock is trading at 8 times earnings if you take out the cash. But if they got really creative and started buying stuff, like they probably should have made a run at Tesla, they could have bought Oculus or something like that. They've got to get into this mindset of the smartest people in the world are not just at Apple. And in the aggregate, there's many more smart people and much more innovation occurring outside of Apple. And you heard Tim Cook with Jim Cramer's excellent interview, by the way, great get. You heard him start talking about maybe they're going to be a little bit more inquisitive and start buying stuff and start knocking on some doors, because you can get growth through acquisitions. Zuckerberg is the least creative person on the planet, but he's amazing at taking founders for a walk and getting them to sell their company. He got Instagram and he got WhatsApp.
Yeah, I understand. Jason,
and Oculus.
You mentioned Jim's interview with Tim last night. It was pretty good. They talked about all kinds of things, service revenue. Here's a quick taste. Listen to this.
When I read the stories, it seems like people think it's over. How could it be that you can't have this ever, or the ecosystem, but it's dead?
Yeah, I think that's a huge overreaction. Look, we just had actually an incredible quarter by absolute standards. $50 billion plus in revenues and $10 billion in profits. To put that in perspective, the $10 billion is more than any other company makes. And so it was pretty good quarter, but not up to the street's expectations, clearly.
Guy, Jason points out, I mean, structurally, the company, as we said in the past hour, doesn't show they don't show their cards, right? Not in the way that Zuckerberg does at an F8 or that Google does talking about their moonshots. And are they paying a price for that, for better or for worse?
It's different strokes for different folks. The fact that Tim Cook would go on Jim Cramer's show is a very interesting data point. I mean, it clearly means they're concerned. I mean, if you ever see John Ive on Jim Cramer's show, then you really should be worried. But until that point,
I don't think we have to worry about that.
What I wish what Jim had asked when Tim started talking about India. So yes, India is a large country, obviously, growing middle class, all that good stuff. But the GDP per capita of India is something like $1,500 or $2,000, and the GDP per capita of the United States is about $53,000. So it may be a large growing population, large middle class, but the disparity in income is so great that, maybe $700 phones are not going to work in India. That may be the question.
And I think Tim Cook's answer to that would be, that's why we came out with a $400 phone. And yes, India's not going to be at the level that China is for quite a few years, but that just shows that the addressable market for the smartphone is going to continue to grow. That's just his side of it. Investors can make up their own minds. But Jason, I'm wondering, what do you think? You mentioned Tesla, but realistically, aside from that, what could Apple have bought in the last year or two that would significantly add to revenue and earnings? Because I hear people say that about M&A. You say it about Facebook, you say it about Google. Google in particular has done plenty of bad M&A as well. But part of the issue is the iPhone has been such a once-in-a-generation product. I don't know what you could buy that would really move the needle compared to the iPhone slowdown.
Yeah, so you're absolutely correct. There's nothing you can buy today that would just solve the problem and just add massive earnings to the greatest earnings machine ever created, right? So you have this benchmark of the iPhone, the greatest earnings machine ever created. You're not going to be able to compete with that. But if you look at the little YouTube acquisition, for $1.6 billion, that company would be worth 50 or 75 billion if it was on the open market today. WhatsApp, Instagram would be worth 20 billion. So you can buy these things and then use what Tim Cook and Apple are great at, which is supply chain and this amazing asset. 14,000 stores.
Not? That's how do you know that they're not?
Well,
they're
because they would have to tell us if they bought stuff.
But they're buying 15 companies a year. They're just not spending a lot of money. Maybe one of those things
they buy companies that are enabling. They only buy enabling technology companies. They won't buy a company that would show them up. They wouldn't buy a company like YouTube or Oculus that is more innovative than them. And that's what they've got to get their head past, is that it's okay to be a brand, to be a company with a couple of brands in it. Like they bought Beats, it's another brand. They could buy. They could have bought Oculus. They could have bought Tesla.
They bought it and then we never heard about it again.
They got to get better at M&A is the high order bit here. They could get better at M&A. I do think they have a huge opportunity with the iPhone 7, with specifically VR and AR. And my gut tells me that they are perfectly positioned to do AR and VR, augmented reality, when you put digital assets on the real world, like looking through sunglasses, or VR when you replace the real world. That could be amazing. The iPhone 7 is a powerhouse. Their chipset with graphic processing units, the GPUs, are very powerful. And what Samsung tried to do with their VR gear, Apple with their App Store and the catalog of great games there and the great developer community, VR could be a huge hit for them. And I would expect iPhone 7 will have some sort of a VR, AR component to it. And maybe they'll come out with sunglasses that do AR. So they probably have a couple of aces up their sleeve. But Guy Kawasaki is 100% right. When Tim Cook is spending that much time trying to explain what they're going to figure out, it's a bit of a tell that they're concerned.
Guy, does Jason have a point? I mean, obviously, Jason likes doing deals. So, I mean, we're all taking this with a grain of salt. But is there bias to do things that are homegrown too extreme?
Yes, NIH was invented at Apple, no question. But perhaps to this point, it has served Apple quite well. How can you argue, right?
Yep. And as we know, Cook's time horizon is probably a bit longer than a lot of people's. Guy, Jason, that was a great discussion. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.